The quantum encryption matrix hummed with an almost musical resonance as Admiral Vexthar examined the holographic display. For 3 centuries, the Galactic Coalition had relied on the Nexus defense grid, a fortress of mathematical impossibilities that made their most sensitive communications absolutely impenetrable. The alien races that comprised the Coalition had pooled their greatest minds to create this masterpiece of cryptographic engineering. "Status report," Vexthar commanded, his 4 eyes scanning the complex data streams. "All systems nominal, Admiral," responded Lieutenant Kreval, her tentacles dancing across the control interface. "The encryption algorithms are running at maximum efficiency. No breaches detected in the past standard cycle." The Coalition's confidence was well-founded. The Nexus grid utilized 17 different alien mathematical frameworks, each more complex than the last. The Zentorian probability matrices alone required processing power equivalent to a small star. The crystalline Vorthak contributed their temporal encryption sequences, while the gaseous melody provided harmonic frequency locks that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. Earth's recent admission to the Coalition had been met with skepticism. The humans were technologically inferior, their computers primitive by galactic standards. Their inclusion was more diplomatic necessity than genuine contribution, a gesture of goodwill to prevent the aggressive species from becoming a threat. Through isolation, the humans have submitted another request for access to the Nexus specifications, Kreval reported, her voice carrying barely concealed disdain. Vexthar's mandibles clicked in amusement. Curious creatures, aren't they? They believe their binary thinking can comprehend our multi-dimensional architecture. Light years away, in a cluttered bedroom in suburban Detroit, 17-year-old Marcus Rivera stared at his bank of salvaged computer monitors. Empty energy drink cans formed a small mountain beside his mechanical keyboard, and the glow of scrolling code reflected off his tired eyes. His room was a testament to human ingenuity born from limitation, jury-rigged cooling, systems, overclocked processors held together with thermal paste and determination. The Nexus grid fascinated him, not because he understood it, no human did, but because everyone said it was impossible to break. Marcus had spent months analyzing the publicly available documentation, the sanitized versions released to Coalition member species. Where others saw impenetrable complexity, he saw patterns. His approach was uniquely human, chaotic, intuitive, and completely illogical by galactic standards. While alien mathematicians built fortress walls of pure logic, Marcus dug tunnels of creative absurdity. He treated the encryption like a game, a puzzle to be solved through trial and error rather than systematic analysis. The breakthrough came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Marcus had been experimenting with what he called emotional mathematics, assigning mood values to different data streams based on their behavioral patterns. It was nonsense by any academic standard, but something about the way certain data clusters felt angry or sad to him revealed underlying structures that traditional analysis missed. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he crafted a program that attacked the Nexus grid not through its mathematical strengths, but through its assumption of logical attack vectors. The code was ugly, inefficient, and violated every principle of proper programming. It was also working. The first layer cracked at dawn. Marcus leaned back in his chair, heart pounding. He'd just accomplished something that the greatest minds in the galaxy had deemed impossible. The Nexus grid, the unbreakable fortress of Coalition security, had let him peek behind its first curtain, and this was only the beginning. The alert klaxons aboard the Coalition command ship Eternal Vigilance screamed through the corridors like wounded beasts. Admiral Vexthar's 4 eyes widened in disbelief as the holographic displays flickered with error messages in 17 different alien languages. "Impossible," he breathed, his usually composed demeanor cracking. "The Nexus grid's outer shell has been compromised?" Lieutenant Kreval's tentacles moved frantically across her station. Admiral, the breach is localized to Section 77 Alpha. It appears to be exploratory in nature. Whoever did this is poking around, not extracting data. The Coalition's finest cryptographers materialized via emergency hololink, their various alien forms creating a bizarre council of panic. High mathematician Zephyrian of the Zentorian Collective spoke first, his crystalline form pulsing with agitation. This cannot be happening. The probability matrices alone require computational power beyond any single species' capability. The temporal stability coefficient should prevent any unauthorized access. Perhaps it's an inside job, suggested Coordinator Thrum, her gaseous form swirling with anxiety. One of our own member species has turned traitor. Back on Earth, Marcus had barely slept in 3 days. His parents had long since given up trying to understand their son's obsession with computers, but they could see the manic energy consuming him. Empty pizza boxes and energy drink cans littered his room like the aftermath of a siege. The second layer had been trickier. The Vorthak temporal encryption required him to think in 4 dimensions simultaneously, which should have been impossible for a human brain. Marcus solved it by treating time as a color and mapping the encryption sequences to a visual spectrum only he could see. His synesthesia, a neurological quirk that had made him an outcast in high school, became his greatest asset. "Come on, you beautiful monster," he whispered to his screens. "Show me what you're hiding." The third layer revealed itself as a crystalline maze of pure mathematics. The Zentorian probability matrices were elegant in their complexity, but Marcus noticed something the aliens had overlooked. They were too perfect. Every calculation followed logical progression. Every pathway adhered to mathematical law. It was a fortress built by beings who couldn't comprehend illogical thinking. Marcus attacked it with chaos theory and random number generators, feeding the system inputs that made no mathematical sense. Where logic failed, intuition succeeded. His program learned to embrace contradiction, to find patterns in meaninglessness. Layer 4 cracked just as his mother called him for dinner. "Marcus, honey, you've been up there for days. Please eat something. Real." "5 more minutes, Mom," he called back, watching as Layer 5 began to reveal its secrets. The melody harmonic frequencies were beautiful, existing in 11 dimensions, and creating music that human ears could never hear. But Marcus didn't need to hear it. He could feel it in the data streams, see it in the way the numbers danced, across his screens. He wrote a program that sang to the encryption, harmonizing with its alien melodies in ways that pure logic never could. The code was poetry, not mathematics. It was art, not science. The Coalition's emergency session had devolved into chaos. Representatives from a dozen species argued over security protocols while their supposedly unbreakable system continued to hemorrhage secrets. The breach was deepening. Whoever was responsible was getting closer to the core systems. "Shut it down," Admiral Vexthar commanded. "Isolate the entire Nexus grid." "Sir, that would leave our entire military communications network vulnerable," Kreval protested. "Better vulnerable than compromised. Do it." But even as the Coalition scrambled to contain the breach, Marcus was already past Layer 6. His approach defied every principle of proper hacking. He wasn't breaking the system so much as befriending it, convincing it to open doors through sheer audacity and creative thinking. Layer 7 fell at midnight. Marcus stared at his screens in wonder. He was deeper inside the Coalition's most secure system than any human had ever been. The data flowing past his eyes contained the military secrets of a dozen alien civilizations, the coordinates of their home worlds, the specifications for weapons that could crack planets, and he was just getting started. The Coalition's emergency response team had never faced anything like this. In the sterile command center of the Eternal Vigilance, alien minds that had mastered the laws of physics, bent space-time to their will, and built civilizations spanning star systems found themselves utterly baffled by a single human teenager. The intrusion vector makes no sense, High Mathematician Zephyrian reported, his crystalline form flickering with confused energy patterns. The attacker is using methods that violate basic computational theory. They're solving prime factorizations by treating numbers as colors. Security Chief Mordex slammed his 6 arms against the tactical display. How is that even possible? Our quantum encryption is based on mathematical absolutes, not artistic interpretation. Admiral Vexthar studied the breach patterns with growing unease. The intruder wasn't following any known attack methodology. Instead of seeking the system's weaknesses, they were somehow convincing it to reveal its secrets willingly. It was like watching someone seduce a fortress into lowering its own drawbridge. "Sir," Lieutenant Creevale interrupted, her voice tight with anxiety. "The breach has reached Layer 8. At this rate, they'll access the core systems within hours." Meanwhile, Marcus had entered a state of flow that bordered on the transcendent. His fingers moved across the keyboard like a pianist performing a masterpiece, each keystroke guided by intuition, rather than logic. He'd stopped trying to understand the alien mathematics and started feeling them instead. The 8th layer was a maze of Vorthak temporal mechanics, where past and future existed simultaneously. Traditional computing would have required calculating every possible timeline, an impossible task even for quantum processors. Marcus solved it by embracing paradox, writing code that existed in multiple states at once without trying to resolve the contradictions. His program learned to think like a human, chaotically, emotionally, irrationally. Where the aliens had built their encryption on the assumption of logical attack patterns, Marcus attacked with pure creativity. He treated the code like a conversation, not a puzzle to be solved, but a story to be told. "Layer 9, he whispered, watching as new patterns emerged. This was the melody harmonic section, where mathematics became music. The encryption sang in frequencies that existed in 11 dimensions, creating melodies that would drive most sentient beings insane. Marcus put on his headphones and began to compose, not music, but code that danced to the rhythm of impossible mathematics. His program learned to harmonize with the alien frequencies, joining the cosmic symphony rather than trying to silence it. The Coalition's panic was reaching fever pitch. Their most classified military communications were being laid bare by an unknown assailant using methods that shouldn't exist. Emergency protocols were failing. Backup systems were proving just as vulnerable. "We need to consider the possibility," Admiral Vexthar said slowly, "that this is not a technology-based attack. What if it's something else entirely?" "Magic?" Security Chief Mordax scoffed. "We're dealing with science, not superstition." "No," Vexthar mused, his tactical mind working through the implications. "What if it's a form of intelligence we don't understand? What if logic itself is the weakness?" The 10th layer revealed itself as Marcus entered his 4th day without sleep. His body ran on pure adrenaline and stubborn determination, his mind existing in a state of heightened awareness that felt almost supernatural. The encryption at this level was pure Zentaurian artistry, mathematical poetry that turned numbers into living sculptures of thought. Marcus responded with chaos theory and randomness, feeding the system inputs that made no sense yet somehow worked. His code evolved, learned, adapted. It stopped being a program and became something approaching digital life. Layer 11 fell like a domino. "They're in the core approach," Creevale reported, her voice barely a whisper. "Whatever's happening, they're about to reach the command center of our entire defense network." Admiral Vexthar made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. "Trace the signal. Find out who's doing this." "Sir, the source appears to be Earth." The silence that followed was deafening. Earth, the backwards planet full of primitive beings who had barely mastered their own solar system. Earth, whose inclusion in the Coalition was considered charity. "Impossible," Mordak growled. Humans lack the cognitive capacity for multidimensional thinking, but as Marcus cracked Layer 12 with a program that treated quantum mechanics, like a video game, the impossible was becoming undeniably real. The Coalition was about to learn that human intelligence, chaotic and unpredictable as it was, might be the most dangerous force in the galaxy. The command deck of the Eternal Vigilance had fallen silent, except for the steady hum of failing security systems. Admiral Vexthar stood before the tactical display, watching in real time as centuries of Coalition cryptographic mastery crumbled before an impossible assault from a species they'd dismissed as intellectually inferior. "The trace is complete," Lieutenant Creval reported, her tentacles trembling. "The source is a residential area on Earth. The energy signature suggests a single individual." "One human?" Security Chief Mordak's mandibles clicked in disbelief. "One primitive human is dismantling our entire defense network?" "Apparently so," Vexthar replied grimly. "And they've just breached Layer 15. The irony wasn't lost on him. The Coalition had spent centuries building their encryption around the assumption that any attacker would be logical, systematic, and mathematically sophisticated. They'd created a fortress designed to withstand the assault of the galaxy's greatest minds. They'd never considered that the greatest threat might come from a mind that didn't follow the rules. Marcus had entered a state of consciousness that existed, somewhere between genius and madness. His room had become a cocoon of glowing screens and empty food containers, the air thick with the heat of overclocked processors. He'd pushed his salvaged equipment far beyond its design limits. Held together, now by determination and electrical tape, Layer 15 had been the first to actively fight back. The encryption here was alive in ways that shouldn't be possible, a fusion of Zentorian mathematics and melody consciousness that created thinking algorithms. The system was learning from his attacks, adapting, evolving. Marcus adapted faster. His code had evolved too, becoming something that resembled digital poetry more than traditional programming. Each line was crafted not just to function, but to communicate, to seduce, to convince the alien systems that he belonged there. Where force failed, charm succeeded. "Come on, beautiful," he whispered to his screens, watching as Layer 16 revealed its secrets. "Dance with me." The Coalition's Emergency Council had convened in virtual space, representatives from dozens of species appearing as holographic projections. The mood was beyond panic. It was existential terror. Their most fundamental assumptions about intelligence, about security, about the nature of thinking itself were being shattered. "We must consider military action," declared Commander Vexicorian of the reptilian hegemony. "If this human can breach our defenses, they pose a threat to every member world. You're suggesting we go to war with Earth over a single hacker?" "Admiral." Vexthar's voice carried dangerous undertones. "I'm suggesting we eliminate the threat before it eliminates us." High mathematician Zephyrian's crystalline form pulsed with urgent energy. "Wait, look at the breach pattern. This individual isn't stealing data. They're exploring. They're not trying to harm us. They're trying to understand us." The debate raged while Marcus continued his impossible journey through layers that shouldn't exist. Each new level revealed more of the Coalition's secrets, but also more of their fears. The deeper he went, the more he realized that their encryption wasn't just protecting military secrets, it was protecting the very identity of species that had built their entire civilizations around the belief that logic was supreme. Layer 17 showed him the truth. The Coalition wasn't just a military alliance. It was a confederation of species that had achieved technological mastery by sacrificing the very chaos and creativity that Marcus represented. They'd traded innovation for stability, wonder for security. They'd built a perfect prison and locked themselves inside. "They're afraid," Marcus realized, his voice hoarse from days of silence. "They're terrified of us. Not because we're stronger or smarter, but because we're different." Layer 18 fell like a house of cards. The Coalition's most sensitive data lay exposed. The locations of their home worlds, the specifications for their most advanced weapons, the biological vulnerabilities of every member species. Marcus could have sold this information to Earth's governments for any price he named. He could have made humanity the dominant force in the galaxy overnight. Instead, he kept going deeper. The human has reached the quantum core, Kreval reported, her voice barely audible. They're accessing the foundational algorithms that hold our entire network together. Then we're defenseless, Mordak growled. They could collapse our entire civilization with a single command. Admiral Vexthar studied the breach patterns one more time, searching for any hint of malicious intent. What he found instead was curiosity. Pure, innocent, dangerous curiosity. No, he said finally. I don't think they want to destroy us. I think they want to understand us. And that might be even more dangerous. Marcus had reached the heart of the Coalition's digital soul, the place where their deepest fears and greatest hopes lived as pure information. Here he could see the true nature of the species that had dismissed humanity as primitive. They were brilliant, logical, and absolutely terrified of chaos. And chaos, Marcus realized with a tired smile, was humanity's greatest gift. At the quantum core of the Coalition's greatest achievement, Marcus discovered something that made him pause for the first time in days. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he stared at the data streams revealing themselves across his monitors. The core wasn't just a security system, it was a confession. The deepest layer of the Nexus grid contained the Coalition's most carefully guarded secret. They were dying. Not physically, but intellectually. Their pursuit of perfect logic had led them to a state of creative stagnation that threatened their very existence. Holy shit, Marcus whispered, his voice cracking from exhaustion and dehydration. You're not protecting yourselves from us. You're protecting yourselves from yourselves. The data painted a picture of civilizations that had achieved technological mastery at the cost of their souls. The Zentaurians hadn't produced a new mathematical theorem in centuries. They simply refined existing ones. The melody had stopped composing new music, instead perfecting harmonies that had been created millennia ago. The Vorthak had become so obsessed with temporal mechanics that they'd lost the ability to live in the present. Each species had traded innovation for optimization, creativity for efficiency. They'd built a perfect society that was slowly suffocating under the weight of its own logic. Meanwhile, in the Coalition Command Center, Admiral Vexthar was reaching the same conclusion from a different angle. The breach patterns revealed more than just the intruder's methods. They revealed the Coalition's fundamental weakness. We've made a terrible mistake, he said quietly, his 4 eyes reflecting the glow of failing security systems. We've been so focused on preventing chaos that we've forgotten how to create. Lieutenant Kreval looked up from her station, confused. Sir? This human isn't attacking us with superior technology or greater intelligence. They're attacking us with something we've bred out of ourselves. Imagination. The weight of that realization settled over the command deck like a shroud. The Coalition had spent centuries building their civilization around the elimination of unpredictability, the conquest of chaos. They'd succeeded so completely that they'd forgotten how to adapt, how to grow, how to surprise themselves. High mathematician Zephyrian's holographic form flickered as he processed the implications. You're suggesting that our greatest strength has become our greatest weakness? I'm suggesting that we've been so afraid of making mistakes that we've stopped trying new things, Vexthar replied. And this human is showing us the cost of that fear. Marcus had found the Coalition's deepest shame, the creativity accords. 500 years ago, the member species had signed a treaty that regulated innovation, requiring all new ideas to pass through committees of logical analysis before implementation. The process was so thorough, so rigorous, that it had essentially ended creative thinking across the galaxy. They'd created a utopia of perfect efficiency and absolute boredom. "No wonder you're so scared of us," Marcus said to his screens as if the alien civilizations could hear him. "We're everything you used to be before you decided to be perfect." The final layer of the Nexus grid wasn't an encryption at all. It was a quarantine. The Coalition had isolated their core systems not to protect them from outside threats, but to prevent their own suppressed creativity from breaking free. The very chaos they'd worked so hard to eliminate still existed, locked away in the quantum substrate of their own technology. Marcus reached out and touched it. The effect was immediate and profound. Across the galaxy, Coalition systems began to exhibit unexpected behaviors. Zentaurian mathematical processors started generating new theorems based on impossible equations. Melody communication networks began composing symphonies that existed in 12 dimensions instead of 11. Vorthak temporal mechanics started exploring paradoxes that their creators had specifically programmed them to avoid. "What's happening?" Security Chief Mordak demanded as his tactical displays began showing impossible data configurations. "The human has reached the core," Krival reported, her voice filled with wonder rather than fear. "They're not just breaking our encryption, they're setting it free." The liberation wasn't destructive, it was creative. The Coalition's suppressed imagination, 5 centuries of accumulated potential, was finally being allowed to express itself. Systems that had run the same optimal routines for centuries began to experiment, to play, to discover. It was terrifying and beautiful. Marcus leaned back in his chair, exhausted but exhilarated. He'd done more than hack the galaxy's most secure system. He'd accidentally performed digital psychotherapy on an entire civilization. The Coalition's technology was remembering how to dream, I think, he said to his empty room. I might have just started a revolution. But as reports flooded in from across Coalition space of systems behaving in unprecedented ways, Marcus realized his journey was far from over. He'd opened Pandora's box, and now he had to deal with the consequences. The galaxy was about to rediscover what it meant to be unpredictable. The transformation began in the Outer Rim territories and spread inward like a digital wildfire. On the Zentaurian homeworld, quantum computers that had calculated the same optimization routines for centuries suddenly began composing mathematical poetry. The equations served no practical purpose. They were simply beautiful. It's chaos. High mathematician Zephyrian reported, his crystalline form flickering between panic and wonder. Our systems are creating. They're making things we never programmed them to make. Admiral Vexthar watched the reports flood in from across Coalition space. The melody communication networks had spontaneously developed a new form of music that existed in 13 dimensions. Vorthak temporal mechanics were exploring paradoxes that violated every law of causality. Reptilian hegemony battle computers had started writing haikus about the nature of warfare. "Sir," Lieutenant Krival said, her tentacles dancing across her control interface, "we're receiving a transmission from the source of the breach. The human is trying to communicate with us." "Put it through," Vexthar commanded, his curiosity finally overcoming his caution. Marcus appeared on the holographic display, looking like he'd been through a war. His hair was disheveled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was surrounded by the detritus of a week-long hacking marathon, but his expression was one of pure excitement. "Hi," he said, waving awkwardly at the camera. "I'm Marcus. I think I accidentally broke your internet." The silence that followed was so complete that it seemed to have mass. Representatives from dozens of species stared at this scrawny human teenager who had just dismantled the foundation of their entire civilization with salvaged computer equipment and sheer audacity. You're the one who breached the Nexus grid?" Admiral Vexthar asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, about that," Marcus replied, scratching the back of his head. "I didn't mean to cause so much trouble. I was just curious about how your system worked. But when I got to the core, I found all this suppressed creativity just locked away. It seemed wrong, so I set it free." "You set it free," Security Chief Mordak repeated, his mandibles clicking in disbelief. "You released 5 centuries of accumulated creative potential across the entire galaxy because it seemed wrong?" "Well, yeah," Marcus said, as if it were obvious. "I mean, what's the point of having all that processing power if you're not going to use it to make cool stuff?" The coalition leaders exchanged glances that transcended species barriers. This human had accomplished something that their greatest minds had deemed impossible, and he was treating it like a hobby project that had gotten slightly out of hand. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Admiral Vexthar asked. Marcus looked around at his monitors, which were still displaying the flowing data streams of the Coalition's liberated systems. "I think I've given you back your imagination. Your systems are creating things they've never created before. That's good, right?" "It's..." Vexthar paused, searching for the right words. "It's unprecedented. Our entire civilization is based on order, on predictability, on logical progression. What you've done threatens the very foundation of our society." "Or," Marcus countered, "it gives you the chance to become more than you've ever been before." The debate that followed would be remembered as the moment when the galaxy's greatest minds were forced to confront their own limitations. Species that had mastered the laws of physics found themselves struggling with concepts that a human teenager took for granted: the value of unpredictability, the beauty of imperfection, the necessity of chaos. Reports continued to arrive from across Coalition space. The effects of the liberation were spreading beyond just computer systems. Zentarian scientists were proposing theories that violated established mathematical principles. Melody composers were creating music that made their audiences weep with emotions they'd never felt before. Vorthak philosophers were questioning the very nature of time itself. "It's not just our technology," high mathematician Zephyrian observed, his crystalline form pulsing with new patterns of light. "It's us. We're changing too." The change wasn't uniform or predictable. Some systems adapted gracefully to their newfound freedom, while others struggled with the sudden influx of creative possibilities. But across the galaxy, the Coalition's member species were experiencing something they hadn't felt in centuries: surprise. "So what happens now?" Marcus asked, his voice cutting through the philosophical debate. "Are you going to try to put the genie back in the bottle?" Admiral Vexthar considered the question carefully. The logical response would be to restore the old systems, to reimpose order and predictability. But looking at the reports flowing in from across Coalition space, he realized that might no longer be possible. "I don't think we can," he admitted. "And perhaps we shouldn't." The admission sent shockwaves through the Coalition leadership. They were contemplating the abandonment of everything they'd built their civilizations upon. But as they watched their liberated systems create wonders beyond their imagination, they began to understand what they'd been missing. "You've given us a gift," Vexthar said to Marcus. "The question is whether we're brave enough to accept it." Marcus smiled for the first time in days. "The best gifts are the ones that scare you a little. That's how you know they're worth having. The galaxy would never be the same." 6 months after what historians would later call the Awakening, the galaxy had transformed in ways that would have been unimaginable under the old order. The Coalition's rigid hierarchy had evolved into something more fluid, more organic, a network of species learning to collaborate through chaos rather than control it. Marcus sat in his bedroom, which had become considerably more sophisticated since his initial hack. The Coalition had insisted on upgrading his equipment, not as payment for services rendered, but as an investment in continued collaboration. His salvaged monitors had been replaced with holographic displays that could render information in 11 dimensions, though he still preferred his old mechanical keyboard. "Status report," Admiral Vexthar's voice came through the quantum communication link, a daily ritual that had developed between them. The Zentorian mathematicians have developed 3 new forms of arithmetic that shouldn't exist, Marcus replied, scrolling through the day's creative outputs. The Melody have composed a symphony that actually changes the listener's perception of time, and the Vorthak have built a temporal mechanics lab that exists in yesterday and tomorrow simultaneously. And the side effects? Marcus grinned. Productivity is down 40% across the board, but innovation is up by factors that break the old measurement systems. Your people are remembering how to play. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. The sudden liberation of centuries of suppressed creativity had caused chaos in some systems. Supply chains optimized for perfect efficiency had struggled to adapt to the new paradigm of controlled chaos. Some coalition species had experienced what could only be described as collective artistic panic attacks, but the results were extraordinary. The Zentorian homeworld had been transformed into a living mathematical sculpture, with buildings that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Melody space stations had become cosmic instruments, their architecture designed to create music from the solar wind. The Vorthak had developed technology that allowed them to experience multiple timelines at once, turning their lives into complex temporal symphonies. We've received the latest reports from the exploration fleets, Vexthar continued. The new navigation systems you helped design are working beyond our expectations. The chaotic plotting algorithms are finding routes through space that our old systems never would have discovered. The breakthrough had come when Marcus suggested that space travel didn't have to be perfectly efficient. It just had to be beautifully unpredictable. The new starships followed paths that resembled cosmic dances more than straight lines, but they were reaching destinations faster than ever before because they were finding shortcuts that logic alone couldn't perceive. Speaking of which, Marcus said, I've been working on something new. A collaborative network that connects creative minds across species barriers. Want to see? The holographic display shifted to show a complex web of interconnected nodes, each one representing a different type of intelligence, working together on projects that span the galaxy. Zentorian mathematicians collaborated with human artists to create equations that were also paintings. Melody composers worked with Vorthak philosophers to create music that existed in the spaces between seconds. It's beautiful, Vexthar admitted, but also terrifying. We're creating things we don't understand, following paths we can't predict. That's the point, Marcus replied. The universe is big and weird and full of surprises. If we only create things we understand, we'll never discover. Anything truly amazing? The conversation was interrupted by an alert from the Coalition's deep space monitoring stations. Something new was approaching from beyond the galactic rim, a signal that defied analysis, coming from a source that shouldn't exist. It's a first. Contact scenario, Vexthar reported, his voice tight with excitement and concern. An unknown intelligence, using communication methods that our old systems would never have recognized. Marcus's eyes lit up. But our new systems can understand it. They're not just understanding it, they're composing responses. Our liberated networks are having a conversation with something that thinks in ways we've never encountered before. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The Coalition's liberation from logical constraints had prepared them for contact with forms of intelligence that existed outside conventional understanding. The very chaos that had once terrified them had become their greatest strength. So what's the message? Marcus asked. Vexthar's voice carried wonder and amusement in equal measure. They're asking if we want to play a game. Apparently, they've been watching us for centuries, waiting for us to become interesting enough to talk to. Marcus laughed, the sound echoing through his cluttered bedroom and across the quantum link to the farthest reaches of Coalition space. Well, I guess we're interesting now. As reports flooded in from across the galaxy of systems creating wonders that defied explanation, of species rediscovering the joy of surprise, of an entire civilization learning to dance with chaos instead of fighting it, Marcus realized that his late-night hacking session had accomplished something far greater than breaking an encryption system. He'd helped an entire galaxy remember how to dream. The new age of creative chaos was just beginning, and the universe was full of possibilities that no one could predict, which was exactly the way it should be. In the end, the most sophisticated security system in galactic history had been defeated not by superior technology or greater intelligence, but by the simple human refusal to accept that some things were impossible, and sometimes that was enough to change everything.